This man used drugs to kill 42 elderly people. The prosecutor brought him to trial, but when confronted with the prosecutor's questions and accusations, he showed not a shred of remorse. He didn't think he'd done anything wrong. He even asked the judge to sentence him to death.
僕を殺してください。
One of the victim's family members couldn't hold back and stood up, shouting that he had taken their loved one's life. The truth is, every family member in that courtroom knew him, but not a single one of them understood why he killed. They couldn't wrap their heads around it. How could such a gentle, caring man do something so incomprehensible? Before this case came to light, Sherbois had been a caregiver at a home care center. He and his colleagues were assigned to a neighborhood, and their job was looking after elderly people who could no longer care for themselves. They called it caregiving, but each home visit lasted only 1 hour. In that single hour, he had to run a basic health check on the patient and clean the grime off their body. On this particular day, the patient they were visiting was named Yumita. He suffered from dementia and couldn't live on his own. Yumita's daughter not only had 3 kids of her own to raise, but also had to find time during the day to take care of her father. On top of running back and forth between both homes, she had to help out at her husband's barbecue restaurant at night. Ever since her father got sick, her life had been consumed by chaos and exhaustion. Although caregivers came by to help now and then, the deep furrow between her brows made it clear she was barely hanging on. After leaving Yumita's place, Sherbois ran into an elderly woman on the street who was having trouble walking. He told his colleague to go ahead to the next house, and stayed behind to walk the old woman safely home. This neighborhood was full of elderly people living alone. Sherbois was endlessly patient with every single one of them. His young female colleague had a real soft spot for him. She said he was truly one of the kindest people she'd ever met. Another colleague remarked that his hair had gone completely white at such a young age. He must have been through a lot. What neither of them knew was that by this point, Sherbois had already killed over 40 people. One day, Yumita's daughter went to her father's house as usual, only to find 2 dead bodies inside. Her father, Yumita, was dead. The other victim was the director of the care center. An autopsy revealed a lethal dose of medication in Yumita's system. The evidence at the scene also suggested this looked like a burglary gone wrong, a break-in turned deadly. The care center staff cooperated with the investigation. All the clues pointed to the director. He'd had a serious gambling habit and owed a significant amount to loan sharks. On top of that, the care center kept spare keys to every client's home. The director had both motive and means. Since the case seemed pretty straightforward, the higher-ups told the prosecutor, Hidemi, to wrap things up quickly. But just as the investigation was about to close, Hidemi stumbled onto something that didn't add up. She pulled up the surveillance footage from that night. The camera showed that Sherbois had also visited Yumita's home at the time of the incident. What's more, traces of Sherbois' blood were found on the director's clothing. The prosecutor began investigating Sherbois, and more of his secrets slowly came to the surface. In the neighborhood covered by Sherbois' care center, the number of elderly people who died at home was significantly higher than in other areas, setting aside suicides and accidents. The vast majority had been classified as natural deaths, but the timing of these deaths all clustered around the days when Sherbois was off work. That was one hell of a coincidence. A terrifying suspicion began forming in Hidemi's mind. She had Sherbois detained at the station, and then went to search his home for evidence. In his room, she found a paper crane and a work notebook used for caregiving notes. Sherbois had been a caregiver for 3 years. The notebook documented everything he'd done on the job over those years. But here's what was strange: even on his days off, the notebook contained detailed entries about the elderly patient's daily routines. This was a major breakthrough. The prosecution then discovered listening devices planted in some of the patient's homes. Hidemi laid all the evidence out in front of Sherbois. Faced with everything, he could no longer deny it. The truth was, he had indeed injected Yumita with a lethal dose of medication. On his way out, he caught the director in the act of stealing. During the struggle, the director accidentally fell down the stairs. The previous deaths had all been ruled natural causes, so every time, he'd slipped through the cracks of the law. But this time, because a criminal case was involved, an autopsy was performed, and Sherbois' secret was finally exposed. As for his motive, what Sherbois had to say sounded utterly deranged. Even if I hadn't done it, their families would have eventually done the same thing. I heard their cries for help, so I reached out my hand. I saved them, and in doing so, I set both them and their families free.